Well, good evening. I think we are ready to roll. Everybody can hear me? Everybody online, I hope, can hear me as well. Good to have everybody here this evening. There is so much that is going on. I want to go over a couple things to make sure that I communicate effectively and everybody is on the same page with everything. So, number one, it was brought to my attention, some people are struggling with the email. All right, here's what we discovered with the email, especially if you've been part of the SCC family for a very long time. Check your spam folder. Because of our extension, the .church extension, sometimes emails don't like that and they send it to the junk spam folder. So if you're not receiving our emails, definitely check that first. That is more than likely the culprit. If that doesn't do it, then you can give us a call and we'll try some other things. But I've talked to a couple of people recently. They've been here for years. I know their settings are all right. I think it's a spam folder issue, and that's fine. All right? Always be checking your email. Debbie can attest. I think every week our emails get longer because there's more going on, and that's exciting. Which brings me to the next thing. Our new student family pastor is going to be joining us the first Sunday in May. I just had an hour-plus conversation with him today, and so we're really looking forward to getting Michael and his wife Summer and Wyatt on board here and get them up to speed and things like that in the coming couple of weeks. So be keeping their family in prayer. Their plan is they're moving from Tampa over to her parents in West Palm. They're going to put all their stuff in a pod until such time that they're hoping target date August. They're going to find a place to rent, and then they'll kind of move everything into there and all that. But he's going to be driving between here and West Palm for a little while. So I see faces. Yeah, we know it's a distance, but he's 29 and we're not. Okay. Let's just keep perspective on that one, okay? No, but it'll hopefully just be a short-term thing and all that. And then that gives them, they're not familiar with this area per se, so this gives them some time to get familiar and all that. All right, here's what is happening next week. And I'm emphasizing next week because I actually had somebody show up tonight and think it's tonight. So there is a program called the Living Last Supper, and they are going to do a presentation for us in lieu of our regular Bible study next week. So same time, all right, 6:30 to 7:30. But this is open to everyone, including kids. In fact, they encourage parents to bring their kids and things with them because they kind of gear it towards kids and things like that. Following their program, we're actually going to have a communion service together, kind of in preparation. And so instead of me in this format teaching, the Living Last Supper will be here, and so invite somebody to come with you. We are going to be streaming it as well. I got their permission to do that, but that's going to be a week from tonight. That'll be next Wednesday. Then that will lead right into Easter weekend, and that is going to be a full weekend. We're going to have our Good Friday service clearly on Friday, all right? We're going to have dinner at 6 p.m., followed by the worship time around 6:45, 7 o'clock. We will be done at latest 8 o'clock, but probably a little bit before that. Bring a chair to sit on, okay, because we're going to do it out in the field, weather permitting, out on the lawn. So if you get a lawn chair, you want to bring picnic blankets. Last year, we had almost total count like 180 people, and so we're anticipating a large crowd. So the earlier you come, the better parking you're going to get and things like that. So hamburgers, hot dogs, we got beans, we got potato macaroni salad. It's going to be a lot of fun. All free, and it's just getting us ready then for Easter Sunday here at SCC. And so we're going to do 2 services this year. We're going to have service at 9 o'clock as normal and 10:30 as normal. So our weekend, our Sunday morning is going to pretty much look the same. Here's what I'm hoping. I am hoping that we are so packed that we have no choice but to add a 3rd service next year. So that may sound crazy on my part, but that's what I'm hoping. Also, there is going to be a community Easter sunrise service down at Riverview Park at 6:30 a.m., all right? So if you would like to be part of that, if you've never gone to it, highly recommend it. It is a wonderful way to start your Resurrection Sunday celebration and to see the sun come up over the lagoon. It's really awesome. So that's going to be happening all next weekend. And then also, if you are part of Women's Bible Study, or maybe you're watching online, Women's Bible Study will not meet tomorrow. Jackie is still recovering from kidney stones, but she is planning on next Thursday having Bible study. So not tomorrow, but next Thursday. So if you come tomorrow, great, I'll be here. Feel free to stay and have a cup of coffee with me, but there won't be a Bible study. All right? Whew, that's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. But like I said, it's going to be a busy time, and things are only going to get busier as we continue to move forward. So let's go ahead and let's invite God into our evening, and we'll jump into our topic. Heavenly Father, just want to pray for our conversation tonight. And Father, I'm asking for you to please just be with us and speak through the lesson as we talk about this important issue of faith and how it relates to our spiritual growth and development. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. You know, faith is an incredibly powerful force in our lives. In fact, you and I, we exercise faith literally every moment of every day. Most of us just don't realize we're doing it. For instance, all of us right now that are present, and I'm assuming those of you at home are going to be in a similar situation, you're exercising faith right now on whatever you are seated upon. You are having faith that it's going to hold you, right? And you are, you know, it's just, you don't have proof of it. Like the seat could collapse. It's possible, but you're putting some faith into it. But faith, outside of that, those little things in our lives is such a powerful force. In fact, Jesus himself said that by faith we can move, does anybody know what? Mountains, all right? Now, he is clearly using hyperbole, okay? You are not going to move Mount Everest and throw it into the ocean. It's not going to happen. That's not his point. But his point is proven true and bears out in countless lives as many personal mountains have been moved by faith, haven't they? Whether that is a rescued marriage, or that is a health situation, or that is, you know, any number of things where we see God active and show up in our lives. And so faith itself is such a huge part of the lives that we live every day. In fact, faith determines our actions, all right? It determines our actions because you and I always act on what we believe, all right? Now, if I was to look out in the parking lot, I'm going to see a wide variety of cars and different manufacturers of those cars. The reason you bought that particular car from that particular manufacturer is you actually have some level of faith in that manufacturer, don't you? All right? Bruce, can you turn up my volume just a little bit, or at least the main? And so you are choosing, that's a little hot, but that's okay. It's the monitors behind me. You are choosing to believe in that particular car company or whatever the product is. You're putting faith that they know what they're doing. I've got an Apple computer here. I've got a lot of faith in Apple products. Generally speaking, they treat me right, okay? They don't break. They work when they're supposed to work. They last a long time. They're dependable, on and on and on and on. Those are examples of just some everyday kind of faith. So we act on what we believe in. The opposite is also true. We don't act on the things that we don't believe in. All right? We don't act on the things we don't believe in. So when you and I properly understand the concept of faith, we act upon what we believe in. We don't act upon what we don't believe in. And when it comes to our relationship with God, did you know that what is the opposite of obedience? No. The opposite of obedience is not disobedience. It is unbelief. you do not actually trust what God is saying. That's really, at the end of the day, that's really what it is. Now, it manifests itself in disobedience, but at the very core, you do not truly trust and believe what God is saying. So, for instance, from the Bible, Abraham, God comes to Abraham. He's living in Ur, which is in present-day Iraq. He tells Abraham, listen, I want you to leave, and I want you to move your entire family and your wealth and all that, and I want you to go to a land that I'm going to show you, which would ultimately be the land of Canaan, modern-day Israel, but that comes much later. While they're making this journey, God comes to Abraham and tells Abraham in his old age that he's going to have a child. 25 years go by, no baby. So Abraham and Sarah are having a conversation one night, and Sarah's like, maybe God meant that you're going to have a child, but not through me directly, but through my servant girl. So tell you what, why don't you sleep with her, which I'm sure she really had to twist his arm to have that happen. And then, the reason we have the Arab-Israeli conflict today is that one decision. Abraham jumped ahead of God's plan based on unbelief, which caused a level of disobedience, which caused the problems that even thousands of years later, the world still wrestles with and struggles with. So, from start to finish, the mission of Jesus was Jesus. Now, what do I mean by that? Jesus didn't come to leave his followers with just insights and parables and wisdom literature to pass on to the next generation, all right? He went too far for that to be the case. So when people say, well, Jesus was just a good man or a good teacher, that is falling woefully short of who Jesus really is. So it should come as no surprise that when Jesus' disciples, after 3 very close years of following him, watch him die, along with him dying, everything that they thought he said about himself died with him. Because in their mindset and in their worldview, they believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the long-awaited one that God had promised for generations to the Jewish people. And Messiahs don't die. All right? They conquer, but they don't die. Sons of God can't be killed, right? They can't be killed. So, you can't crucify the resurrection and the life. That seems contradictory. But there's Jesus, nailed to a Roman cross, and on that cross, after 6 hours, he dies. And when Jesus died, here's what we forget. In the midst of that, nobody believed who he claimed to be, including his very own disciples. They thought they had been misled and disillusioned. So when Jesus died, there was no such thing as Christianity. It didn't exist. His followers did what? They ran. They ran. There was no discussion about how to keep his teachings, how to implement his wisdom. There was none of that. Everything that he'd done miraculously, suddenly, is now forgotten. He was dead, and his followers would be left to choose between 2 explanations. Either he was a deranged, confused individual, and they had been duped by him, or he was who he really claimed to be. And they would choose the latter for the next 72 hours. Now, why do I say that? Because you and I have to understand something. Again, 2,000 plus years of history behind us. We kind of view these events through different lenses. But if you could put yourself in Peter's shoes, James' shoes, John's shoes, Matthew's shoes, all the other apostles' shoes, and what they had gone through, experienced, and thought very likely was going to happen to them next. You would then begin to understand that after Jesus rises from the dead, everything would change for them. Because these are the very people that are going to later sacrifice their lives, every one of them, for their crucified leader. Every one of them. And so this is where the story of Jesus, and when I say true Christianity, okay, I mean the original Jesus-following kind of Christianity that we see in the first 300 years of the church. This is where it parts ways with every tradition and institution. And this is where the story becomes both unexplainable. How do you explain a guy rising from the dead? And undeniable at the same time. These individuals and countless others would give their lives to this testimony that there was a guy named Jesus, and he was killed by the Romans, and he comes back around 72 hours later. Right? If that story's false, do you die for that? In the first century, where there's no social media, you don't get 15 minutes of fame because nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares who you are. All right? So, Jesus' disciples would risk their lives to kind of re-engage with Jesus and his mission. So much so that 2,000 years later, here we are talking about it. Now, what's most important for context for us tonight is to understand that the hinge point, okay, the lynch point of all of this, the thing that makes all of the difference was not something that Jesus taught. It's something that Jesus did. He came back from the dead. He came back to life. All right? And not even his most loyal followers believed that Jesus had come back until they visually could see him with their own eyes. But once they saw him, they believed. And that became a catalyst for their faith. And in that moment, they began to trust in a way they had never trusted before. And their unbelief would lead to belief. And Luke, who would come along later, who was a Gentile, who would write the Gospel of Luke as well as the book of Acts that records the history of the early church, would talk about what happens in Jerusalem when Jesus' followers go into the streets with incredible confidence and began to tell everybody that this guy was now alive. Thousands of people would gather together to hear this news. Peter would become this appointed spokesman, probably because he was the loudest of the group, all right? And his message was so painfully direct, all right? Now, please understand, we're less than 2 months out from Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. And when Jesus was arrested, before he even goes to the cross, his disciples do what? They run away. And yet 40 plus days later, they are now unashamedly, publicly claiming that Jesus rose from the dead. Where did they get that courage? And on top of that, Peter ends up saying things like, you killed him, God raised him, we've seen him, so you probably ought to say you're sorry, repent, and turn around. And Peter would stare down the very people that he was running from 2 months earlier. I mean, that's just amazing. What causes that? What causes that? Faith. Belief in what they had seen and what they had experienced. And ever since, following Jesus requires you and I to have a measure of faith. Specifically, it requires one person, or it requires us to place our trust in the person of Jesus. Not in his teachings, they're great. Okay? but in the person of Jesus. Christianity is not about blind faith. It's an informed faith. And at the center is this incredible event that would cause this incredible trust to grow. So what we want to talk about tonight is we want to talk about how faith affects our spiritual growth and our spiritual development. Because as I look around the room, and for those of you that are online, every single one of us has faith. The question is, how much? How much? How much do we really believe in the things that we hear? Or are we struggling to believe in those things? Well, the author of Hebrews, whoever it is, we don't really know. Some say Paul, some say it was a couple other people. But the author writes this in Hebrews 11:6. It says, "Now, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Since the one who draws near to him must believe that he what? Exists, and that he rewards those who seek him." All right? So, the author makes it very clear that the starting point for a relationship with God is what? It's faith. Charles Spurgeon, who was a famous preacher in the 1800s, said this: "Little faith will bring your soul to heaven. Great faith will bring heaven to your soul." All right? And that sounds like a quippy little quote, but it is a profound statement. Okay? Little faith will bring your soul to heaven, believing in the work of Jesus on your behalf on the cross. But great faith, exercising and living out the things that he did teach and how he asks us to live, will bring heaven to your soul as well as the lives of the people that are around you. Why? Because faith determines our actions. And like I mentioned before, we act on what we believe and vice versa. Think about it. In your life, you will act upon the things that you really believe in, right? There are few areas and segments of our society and culture that this bears out more than politics. No matter what side of the aisle you decide to stand upon, typically speaking, you will choose one or the other. And you'll have your reasons. And there is almost nothing that that party can or cannot do to sway your vote. And there is absolutely nothing from the other party that they're going to say to convince you to change to the other side, right? That's the way most people are. Okay? Why? Because you have a belief in that particular party's platform. And what you believe determines how you act, or in this case, how you vote. And so that's why it's important to know all the issues and all the beliefs and different things like that. Because faith determines our actions. And when it comes to God and when it comes to Jesus, unless you're just going to play and practice religion, which will never get you anywhere, your faith will determine your direct relationship with God and how you see him interacting in your life. For instance, there have been times in my life where I have done things because of faith, and there have been times in my life when I did not do things that I wanted to do, that I considered doing, that I wrestled over doing, but ultimately chose not to do because my faith in God dictated that. And so this is an important issue. Faith plays such a critical part in our spiritual growth and development. And it's so important that you and I understand this. Because if we don't, then the faith that we think we have is on tenuous ground. And I guarantee, because it happens every day, something will happen in a person's life that thinks they have faith, that will so wreck them and destroy their faith that they will walk away from the God who made them, loves them, and died on the cross for them. And they'll say, I don't want any of it. And they'll throw it out the window. That's the danger of not wrestling with this issue. So Oswald Chambers, he is a very famous in theological circles author and Bible teacher, lecturer. He said this: faith is not intelligent understanding. Okay, so I would say it this way: faith is not academics. Okay, it's not academic. It's not something you learn from a book. Faith is a deliberate commitment to a person where I see no way. All right? Now, this is Todd's loose interpretation of what I think Dr. Chambers is trying to say. Faith is when I choose to place my loyalty and my trust in a person, in this case Jesus, and I really can't see him, and I can't feel him, and I can't touch him, and I don't hear him in my ear, or any of that. I'm just going on based on the claims of his teachings and those that followed him the closest. Joni Eareckson Tada, maybe you've heard of her before, all right? She said this: faith isn't the ability to believe long and far into the misty future. It's simply taking God at his word and taking the next step. All right? So it's not this ability to see so far into the future that, it's hazy and all that. No, it's just sometimes faith is just getting us out the door to the next step. And so what both of these individuals are saying is your faith is the determining factor in your own personal spiritual growth. And like I said, if you want to look at a faith scale, okay, we are all at different increments on that scale. All right, some of us have been, believers for a very long time, and our faith may be stronger. Okay, some of us may be younger to the faith, but we're all on this scale, and we're moving in the same direction, hopefully. All right, but your faith, how much, and I would use this word too, how much confidence you put into Jesus is a very determining factor for your own personal spiritual growth. That's why some people are spotty with church attendance. Okay, now I know this is pastor speak and this is what I get paid to say, but trust me, I've got a broader point on this. All right? Church attendance is not the end-all be-all, okay? But it is a factor in your loyalty and relationship with Jesus. Because Jesus asks us not to ignore getting together. In fact, he tells us, don't forsake getting together. Get together. Why? Because we need each other corporately. Life's hard, and we were not meant to do life alone. But if I don't really believe that, well, then I'll come up with one of the many excuses that people, I'm closest to God at the beach or on the golf course or, whatever, all right? And so we come up with all those different reasonings and excuses and things like that. Or when it comes to something that God might say that gets in the way of how we want to live. Well, now we're at a crossroads. Am I just going to live a certain way because that's what I want to do? Or am I going to trust God that he actually knows what he's talking about and wait on his timing? Your faith determines all of that. And your answer to those kind of questions and how you wrestle with those kind of questions is a big factor in a person's spiritual growth. Let's face it, very few people have those miraculous moments where God just, in the way that only God can, just blatantly shows up in a person's life, shakes them, and says, okay, now come follow me. Yes, Lord, I'll do that now. those are one-offs when they happen, and God can do whatever he wants to. But the reality is, God kind of lets us make our choices and have free will. And we can choose to obey or disobey, or we can choose to trust, or we can choose not to trust. So faith demands, true faith, demands total commitment from us. Now, at the offset, that might seem somewhat tough. And we might push back a little bit on that. Like, well, I mean, I want to believe, but. Well, let me just remind us. Was Jesus totally committed to you? Remember, he made himself vulnerable to his creation one time when we murdered him. Just one time. That is commitment, right? That is commitment. And so anything less from us, isn't that kind of disrespectful sometimes to what he did on our behalf? So, if I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and we're invaded by a foreign government, and I go, you know what? I'm really not going to fight. I don't believe in the cause, blah, 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 and all this. Am I actually being loyal? I'm not. My loyalty is now in question. Same is true when God asks me to trust him and to do things his way. I'm at a point of decision. So, you and I can have only one primary loyalty, right? This is why husbands, wives don't want other women and men involved in the relationship, right? This is why, because we struggle to be loyal to one person, let alone multiple. Well, here's the reality. People try to be loyal to God and loyal to the world at the same time. And guess who's going to win out almost every time? The world. Because our fallen nature is going to sway us and swing us in that direction. And the current of culture is constantly pulling against God. It's never flowing towards him. All right? That's life in a fallen world. And so when it comes to God, when we make the determining factor, okay, God, you exist. Now we have to start saying, am I going to be loyal to that reality? Is God really who he claims to be? And so people are like, well, I'm not going to be loyal to a book, meaning the Bible, or I'm not going to be loyal to a denomination, or all this. Just stop. Just be loyal to God. The Bible makes the claim that it is the Word of God. It says it hundreds of times, over and over and over. It was written by over 40 different individuals, 3 different continents, 3 different languages. Took over 1,500 years to put together. That's what a lot of people just don't understand. That, well, a couple guys got together and threw a bunch of old ancient texts together. No, that is not how it happened. There is a lot of history that people want to ignore, but that when you actually research it, proves itself to be completely opposite of the way that a lot of people view it. Why would God go through all of that trouble just so he can be in competition? Why? So, in your own life, what's your main motivation? Okay? What's your main motivation? Think of it this way. Think of your diet exercise routine. If you make a decision, say you go to the doctor, blood pressure's a little high, cholesterol spiking a little bit, getting a fatty liver, Angie's going, yeah, that's me right now. Yeah, I don't know. But you're going through all those kind of things, all right, and the doctor says, you need to lose some weight, okay? Right there, you now have a decision to make. Either the doctor knows what he's talking about, and you do need to lose some weight, or, yeah, that's his opinion, but you know what? I like to eat. And I like to eat everything opposite. I can remember during my heavier years, yeah, amen, I'd like to eat too. But I remember sitting with the doctor, and we're going through all this. He's like, yeah, you got a fatty liver. I'm like, I didn't know my liver could get fat. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. And so we were talking about this, and he's like, you need to keep your meat intake down, and no more than 3 ounces at a time. I'm like, how much is 3 ounces? He goes, about the back of your hand. And I looked at him, half serious, half joking. I'm like, that's my first bite. Like, this is like the quarter of what I want to eat, But in that moment, I had a decision to make. Okay, I'm either got to get serious about this or not, because there is going to be a health determination if I don't. That motivated me to start riding my bike, watching what I eat. I'd love to say that I'm perfect with it. I'd like to lose about 8 pounds, but here we are. I just had an ice cream bar tonight, and I will have one tomorrow. There are certain things that I don't know that I'd want to give up. Do you know why? Because I'm not motivated to. Are you motivated by the fact that there is an entity that exists in a realm that we don't understand, that we call God, that claims to create everything, including ourselves, that sees all, that controls, at the end of the day, has sovereign control over everything? And are we going to be loyal to that entity? Or do we just play church? Sing a couple nice songs, listen to a TED Talk, and see, sermons can either be TED Talks or they can be life-changing. It depends on your motivation. Your motivation. Okay? It's not the information. It's the motivation after we receive the information. So when it comes to faith, what's your main motivation? Is it, well, I believe God exists, and I want to honor him, and I want to live in his kingdom someday? Or, I like the idea that God exists, I'm not really sure, so I'm going to continue to do things my way. Well, most of us have done things our way for a very long time. How's that working out for us? We all have stories, don't we? So, Paul would write to the Romans in 12:1. How do we make God the main motivation? Well, he says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, in other words, in light of what God has done for humanity, his human family, through Jesus' sacrifice, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. That seems counterintuitive, because sacrifices are generally what? Dead, right? You kill animals. Paul says, no, living, okay? Holy, that means set apart, and pleasing to God. That means I want to try to honor God and respect his authority. This is your true worship. Notice church attendance not in there. Daily Bible reading's not in there. Prayer's not in there. Those are all wonderful things. Those are things that will enhance our relationship with God. But our true act of worship is to what? Honor God with our lives. All right? So, what one thing would you write down in the box of your life when it comes to your motivation? What one thing would you write down? Oh, by the way, when it comes to motivation, back in the 80s, mid-80s, all right? Some of us are old enough to remember that. Back in the 80s, Coca-Cola got together and I don't even know what the word is, but they met together and they debated back and forth for a very long time to try to come up with a single slogan that would define the future of their company. And they came up with "Tastes Great," or something similar to that, all right? That's where New Coke was born. They thought, well, Coke doesn't taste good enough, we need to change it. What they didn't take into effect was that the general population had no problem with how Coca-Cola tasted before the change. And we all remember the story, right? It nearly tanked the company. They had to go back and sit in meeting after meeting and come up where they finally came up with this slogan, an American tradition. Because after their research, they're like, Coca-Cola has this rich tradition in America, and people prefer its original formula. I don't even know, can you get New Coke today? I don't think it exists anymore. I can remember they were, for a little while, you could get both, all right? But it's been decades since I've seen that. But Coca-Cola almost lost their company over one stupid decision. Why? Because they changed the main thing, all right? They changed the main thing. Same is true here. What is your main driving force? We can only be a living demonstration of the goodness of God if we have first offered ourselves as a living sacrifice to Him. Okay? There are plenty of non-Christians, okay? They may have different religious beliefs or they may have no religion whatsoever, all right? But they're good, moral people. That is not what makes a person a Christian. Morality alone does not make a person a Christian. It is something way beyond that. It is a decision to say, God, because I believe who you say you are, I'm going to follow your ways and allow my life to be a demonstration of your truths. That's what that is. That's what it means by a living demonstration. And it's faith that motivates us to be totally obedient. There are a lot of people that believe that there is an entity that we are familiar with by calling him God. Okay, this eternal entity outside of our realm and things like that. But it doesn't change a single thing about how they live every single day. All right? That's not biblical faith. That's an intellectual assent. That's an intellectual belief. But it's not biblical faith. And you and I practice that kind of stuff all the time. Okay? Again, I can use a whole diet illustration on this. I believe that eating ice cream bars is ultimately not healthy for me. Don't care. I'm going to eat ice cream bars because they're good. Right? Right? So, just because I believe something, it doesn't change me. True faith, though, in who God is and the evidence of said being is what motivates me to be totally obedient, even when I don't really want to be. When I don't really want to be. Faith has a profound effect on three key areas of our lives. Area number one is in the area of obedience. So how we choose to navigate life. All right, just how we choose to navigate it. Okay? So God tells me to love my enemies. Okay, well, that sounds great in theory, right? How do I put that into practice? But when I figure that out in the context of my situation, guess what? I find out fairly quickly that while they're still my enemy and they may not like me, my attitude towards them has completely changed. And at the end of the day, God will deal with them with their issue just as he will deal with me and my issue. So obedience. Secondly is peace, all right? In a world of turmoil, in a world where we lack peace, and by the way, we're not just talking about a lack of conflict, okay? We're talking about this almost intangible contentment, peace in the midst of even difficult circumstances, a serenity, if you will, ultimately comes about because of faith. All right? I can get every 4 years, I can get all bent out of shape about the direction that our country takes, this whatever side of the aisle you choose to be on. Or you can take a bigger worldview picture and say, I know it's not always going to be this way because Jesus told me he's going to set up his kingdom someday, and then things are going to be right. They're going to be the way they're supposed to be. Until then, I have to live in this in-between and figure it out. But guess what? When I can remember the promises of God, it brings about peace in my life. When I'm going through a situation, maybe it's medical, maybe it's marital, maybe it's family, what you can pick it, whatever it is. And then I can start remembering the promises of God, that I will be with you. Take courage. Do not fear. Well, I can remember, you know what? I'm going through this, but I'm not alone. I'm not alone. That breeds what? Peace. Third area is hope. Okay? Fastest way to destroy a person's life, remove hope from them. Without hope, people don't live very long. All right? So hope is a key part. The disciples, after Jesus rose from the dead, their jobs got way, way more difficult than just running from the Romans and getting arrested. Their problems got way bigger than that. Because now they were commissioned to start a brand new way of living. They had to model it, they had to teach it, and they had to do so in a persecuted environment. And every one of them, with the exception of John, who would end up living the longest, dying of old age, but dying because he had been taken to the Isle of Patmos and basically was left by himself. All right? Everybody else dies these violent deaths. What in the world would persuade a person to stick to that story? The hope. Which, by the way, biblical hope, that English word, not such a good word for us today, because hope still keeps a nebulous concept in our mind. But in the Greek, it means a confidence. That, hey, God, I don't know how you're going to work all this out. I just know you're going to work it out. You're going to work it out. Blaise Pascal said, this is true because God has created us to desire our own well-being rather than our own suffering. It's a quality of being made in his image. All right? So it is just a huge area that is profound. All men seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. The cause of some going to war and others avoiding it, it is the same desire in both, attended with different views. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the motive of every action of every man, even of those who hang themselves. At the end of the day, what do people want? They want happiness, peace, and contentment in their lives. And we will go to great lengths to see that that happens. All right? People sacrifice all the time for that. Every road of your life will either lead you closer to Christ or further from him. This is a principle that I've tried to teach my children. This is a principle that when I was a student minister, I used to try to teach the students. How you choose to live your life will either draw a person closer to God or push them further away. And that's very true. And it's true in your life as well. That's why when you see a person like in my position that has a moral failing, that really wrecks people's faith. Because they looked at that person, right, wrong, or indifferent, that person to them was helping represent an ideal that they were trying to get to. And now they can't follow that person anymore. And it causes all kinds of problems. Now, there are other people, they learn to navigate that. For instance, for me, I don't put my faith, hope, and trust in people. I just don't. I can remember my mom many, many years ago saying, don't trust anybody. They're not dependable. Make them earn your trust. And I took that to heart. And by golly, she was right more than she was wrong. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean trust but verify, right? However, when it comes to my life and viewing other people's faith, my faith is not in a person, not in the people that claim to be Christians. In fact, I resolved a long time ago that everybody makes mistakes, and even the best person is going to fail you from time to time. It's going to happen. Listen, we've all been there. We've had spouses fail us. We've failed our parents. We've had bosses fail us. We've had employees fail us. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's going to happen, all right? For some people, that absolutely wrecks them. Or you learn, well, at some point, I'm going to be let down by somebody, but my ultimate faith is in the person of Jesus and what he did for me. And so my job in that moment, when they don't measure up to what I envision them to be, is to now pivot and look back at Jesus and say, but that's the perfect example. That's where I need to look. Does that make sense? I felt like I rambled there for a while, but hopefully I got back to the point. All right? I love this quote. A shriveled soul lives only for itself. Isn't that true? All right? Let me give you two real-world illustrations of this. Pornography is one. People that take in pornography over time damage their lives. They look fine on the outside, but they damage their internal lives, sometimes irreparably for the rest of their lives. It has an effect on their soul. That's just the nature of it. All right? The second thing, consumer debt. Ever been in debt? You know how crippling debt can be, right? I've had debt in my life. You go to sleep wondering, how am I going to get this paid off? Boy, I really wish I didn't have this hanging over me. Why did I buy that, right? Why did I go there? God doesn't ask us to keep our hearts and our minds pure to limit us. He asks us to keep our hearts and our lives pure to keep us from the self-destructed nature of the impurity that's all around us. I mean, you see this in social media now. Does anybody know who Amanda Bynes is? So in the early 2000s, Amanda Bynes was all over Nickelodeon, child star, beautiful young actress, and all this. Very, very popular. She had just horrific things happen to her, and it altered the course of her life, and she got into drugs and all that. You wouldn't recognize her today. I saw two side-by-sides. One was her 20 years ago and today. Not even the same person. Not even the same. You would, indistinguishable. That is an extreme example of what we're talking about here. All right? That's why the true reality is we always obey our beliefs. If you think you're scum, guess what? You're going to live like it. You're going to live like it. If you think your life has no meaning and purpose, then you're going to live like that. All right? You're going to live like that. It's been said, I don't know who said it, but I agree with this statement. Disobedience in the church today, church with capital C, is rooted in massive unbelief in God. That even though you go to a place that claims God's existence and all this, at the end of the day, the majority of people practice unbelief in God. They will follow God only when it's convenient to their lives. I heard somebody say this years ago, and I ended up stealing it too. I just think it's a great quote. Jesus doesn't exist to enhance our life. He exists to change it. Most people just wanting to enhance it. And again, it goes back to morality. Well, I just want to be a good moral person. You don't have to be a Christian to be a good moral person. Morality has little to do with Christianity. All right, yes, Christians should be people of high moral integrity, but you don't have to be a Christian to do that. Okay? Faith is what gives us the strength, ultimate strength, to be able to face trials and to persevere over the things that we need to overcome. 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, therefore we don't give up. Even though our outer person is being destroyed, Paul knew a little bit of something about how tough life could get. Our inner person is being renewed day by day. For our momentary light affliction. I love this. This is coming from a guy that had been imprisoned multiple times, beaten multiple times, shipwrecked multiple times, abandoned multiple times, all right? Momentary light affliction. Wow, Paul, I'd hate to see if you were actually going through severe affliction, right? Is producing for us an absolutely incomparable eternal weight of glory. So, we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Yeah, because Paul, if you focused on just what you could see, you would abandon that a long time ago. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is what? Eternal. That's why faith is central to our spiritual growth and development. And so, as we close tonight, like I said, we are all on this spectrum of faith, this journey of faith, all right? And really, it's just taking a step at a time in the right direction and allow God to build up your confidence in Him. And you know what? I've heard stories like this where people have said, God, I need you to prove to me you exist. Well, He knows who actually means that, and there are times when that happens. But there are also times when that doesn't happen. Now what do you do? There are times when you may pray ardently, and you've got people saying, yeah, I know God's going to do this for you, and it doesn't happen. Now what do you do? Now what do you do? I love the story of David. Well, I shouldn't say I love the story. The story's tragic, but the point the story is making is beautiful. So David commits adultery with Bathsheba, all right? And as a result, God tells David, he's going to take the life of the child, which we look at and we're like, oh, it's horrible and all that. And it is. It's tragic and all that. But what David ends up saying is he ends up telling, after the baby dies, he comes out of this period of grief and he says, my baby's not coming back to me, but I'm going to go to him. What did David know? David knew, well, God took the baby from presence on this planet, but that baby exists, and I'm going to see him someday. Well, that's a beautiful thought. That's a beautiful reality. And what does that do? That helps build our confidence and our faith in God. And by the way, David said that hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years, before Jesus comes on the scene, dies, and comes back to life less than 72 hours later, and proves that one day, all of us are going to enjoy the same kind of resurrection that Jesus did, in an environment suited and the way God has always intended things to be. And you and I will get there, not because of good works, not because we're nice people, but because we chose to put our faith in Jesus and what He did on our behalf. All right, so next week, don't forget, we've got Living Last Supper. It's going to be neat. You won't want to miss it. Have a good night, everybody, and I will see everybody online